I got off the plane and immediately said, I am not in Florida anymore. It is freezing here. But I'm so excited to be with you. It's always an honor. And over the next little bit, you're going to get to know a lot about me. And I hope that when you leave here, you're going to feel refreshed and hopeful and just ready to conquer this next year in 2025. But in order for us to do that, I have to be very honest and upfront right off the bat. And unfortunately, that means I'm probably going to disappoint some people in the first 5 minutes of me speaking. And what I mean by that is I have a question. I actually have three. How many people in this room would consider themselves marathoners? How many marathoners do we have? We've got several back there. For those of you that don't know, marathons are 26.2 miles. That is a lot of miles, so that's pretty incredible. How many people in this room have run or consider themselves runners, not marathoners, but you run a couple miles to feel good? It's a good exercise. How many of those do we have? Okay, so several more. Now, how many people in here would only run if someone was chasing you? Let's be honest. All right, lots more of those. So in 2013, I became known as a Boston Marathon bombing survivor. What group do you think that I was in? Was I 1, a marathoner, 2, regular runner a little bit, or 3, would only run if someone was chasing me? Just yell it out. 3. Oh my gosh, how did you guys know already? You must have read something. Okay. So yes, I was in group number 3. I was on the sidelines eating chocolate-covered pretzels, wondering why anyone would ever run 26.2 miles. Holy moly. But I have great admiration and respect for anyone that does, and it did become a part of my life a little bit later on. But that was just not me at that time. As a matter of fact, it was my birthday weekend, my first time ever in the city of Boston, and I had come up with my 5-year-old son, Noah, to cheer on a friend of ours who had qualified. And in this picture, you see Noah, he's holding up his sign, he's cheering on all the runners. And we started that day at the 17-mile marker. And I remember this one particular mother-son moment that we had where Noah was standing on the sidelines and he was watching the runners pass. And one of the runners proceeded to lose his breakfast right in front of Noah. And he gives me the most horrified look. But then afterwards, what's really amazing is that same runner who had just gotten sick in front of him continued to run. That is how dedicated these people really are. And I remember one person in our group of about 9 suggesting that we make our way closer to the finish line. And this is fantastic in theory. But to actually make it from mile 17 to 26.2 right there at the finish, it gets extremely fuzzy, especially when you have a 5-year-old kindergartner with you. And so by the time we were able to get right down at the finish line, we were so close, we're right in the middle of the action. We can see the sweat pouring off the runners' faces, these smiles that stretched from ear to ear as each one crossed the line. But I remember my son getting more and more over it. He's bored. He's tugging on my clothes. Mom, when are we gonna leave, Mom? I'm so bored, Mom. What is happening, Mom? And if I'm really honest, because I told you I would be, I was pretty bored too. There's only so many runners you can watch cross before it gets a little bit repetitive. So I start racking my brain because our runner hadn't crossed yet. And I'm thinking, I don't want my son to get lost in the crowd. Why in the world did I bring my kindergartner to a marathon of 500,000 people? That wasn't the smartest idea. But I said, buddy, you know what is a good idea? Let's sit down on Mommy's feet. How about you sit down right in front of me and play in the rocks like you're a scientist? Now, there were no rocks. We were on asphalt, but to a 5-year-old, that was a cool thing to do. So Noah excitedly sat down on my feet, and he's still cheering, and he's looking for his rocks. And he had his back up against my shins. And that is exactly where my little boy was when a bomb in a backpack went off less than 3 feet behind us. It still gives me chills all over my body to tell you that, even though I've told my story thousands of times. But because of the decision that I made right before to place my son down on my feet, my body was able to act as a human shield for him and save his life. I was able to take everything in the back of the legs, the torso, and the left hand, and because of that, my son walked away with 2 injuries. He had a cut to his bone on his right leg that they were able to stitch up. He had a piece of shrapnel graze the back of his head, so he has a small little bald spot. But that same little boy is now 17 years old and getting ready to graduate high school. And I'm telling you, this mama bear can't take it. I don't know how I'm going to do this, but Noah is phenomenal. He's such an amazing person, and he has grown into, I know that he is going to change lives one day. But I feel like I had nothing to do with that, right? Because the decision to place him down, how would I have ever known to do that in a matter of minutes before that bomb went off? And while the majority of us will never get blown up by a bomb at a marathon like we did, every single person knows what it's like to have life blow up in their face. But I'm here to tell you this morning that I believe with all of my heart that no matter what we're going through, no matter what happened yesterday, no matter what may have happened right before you came here this morning, as long as you are breathing, as long as you have that beat in your chest and that air in your lungs, you, my friend, have so much purpose. So much purpose. But it gets so difficult, doesn't it? When life blows up in our face and you're there like I was, waking up from a medically induced coma, staring at 4 blank walls in a hospital in a city that you have never been to before. That was the first time I ever walked on that sidewalk. That was the first time that I ever participated in watching a marathon. I didn't know what Patriots Day was. I had no idea that the Boston City shut down for the marathon. It's a holiday. It's a big deal. And all of a sudden, I became this person laying in this hospital bed, just trusting all of the people around me that they were going to take care of me and support me in one of the scariest moments of my life. But I look back on that day, and as much horror and tragedy and terror that I saw, and it certainly was, I remember my bones were laying next to me on the sidewalk. I remember being in a pool of my own blood. There were nails and ball bearings and BBs and everything these brothers packed into these pressure cooker bombs. I remember people's body parts scattered on the ground around me, unattached to them. It was a true war scene. And if you can think about what I saw that day, can you imagine it in my son's eyes, what he experienced at 5 years old? His innocence was totally stripped of him that day. And very quickly, I had to figure out how I was going to tell my son that he was involved in one of the largest terrorist attacks on U.S. soil. But I also remember something else, something far greater than the pain. I remember all of the people that rushed in to save us, not knowing if a 3rd or 4th bomb was getting ready to go off, just knowing that they wanted to help strangers off the street like me. And guess what? They didn't ask me my political affiliation. They didn't ask me anything else for me to be able to have their help. They didn't care. They just wanted to save people. And because of that, I am able to stand here and tell my story. And wouldn't it be a huge disservice to everyone that rushed in to save us if I decided to give up now? If I said that I have been through too much in my life, that I am too exhausted, because it would be so easy to do. As a matter of fact, 6 months before Boston, I got held up in a Walmart parking lot and robbed at gunpoint. I thought that was gonna be the biggest highlight of my life. Not even close. Not even close. But that's what happens when tragedy strikes, and that's what's amazing. Oh, it just gets me so pumped up. I'm on fire today, because when things happen in our lives, there are so many people that come in to support and save us. So many people that are lifting us up, saying that it is going to be okay. And we don't know how we're going to make it through ourselves, but somehow we do. And that's what God does for us too. And I'm not going to stand up here and read scriptures and preach to you. What I'm going to say is the reason that I believe in a higher power, the reason that I believe that God exists in my life, is because I've seen it too many times to deny it. I should have, thanks. I should not have lived that day. As a matter of fact, they said if I had been on the street for 2 minutes longer, I would have bled out and died. My son shouldn't be here. If he was standing up next to me that day, he would have died on scene, because all of the shrapnel pieces that I took in my body would have been in him. Standing here before you, I've had 76 operations as a result of that bombing. Most recently was last year. Last year, I was in a wheelchair for 7 months of the year because I had a surgery where they had to take more of my leg, and it was complicated, and it ended up being this whole thing. And the reason that I tell you that is because this may have happened to me almost 12 years ago, but the aftermath is still happening right now. And so often that happens to each of us, right? We go through something. There's a period of time where grief is accepted, where we can be down and sad. But then there's almost this universal way of saying, okay, now you've got to get over it, right? We've got to get on. We've got to move on with our lives. But see, I don't believe that. I believe that's where the support comes through. And I believe that your life, when you go through something, it changes. That changed the trajectory of my entire world. And I think about where I was versus where I was when I was in the hospital and where I was before. Because for 26 years, I expected to get up out of the bed and go about my day. I expected to put 2 feet on the ground. Typically, it meant hitting the snooze button about 13 different times because I was running late to everything and constantly chaotic. I was a single mom, so I had this chip on my shoulder. I thought the more successful I could be in my career, the better person I would be, the better mom I would be. And it wasn't until a bomb shattered my world that I realized I had it wrong. That purpose is not something that we attain along the journey of our lives. Purpose is what already lives deep down inside each of us. And it is that air in our lungs and that beat in our chest, and knowing that we are all here for a reason. But the doctor walked in and he said, Rebekah, we've got some good news for you, and we've got some bad news. The good news is you're alive. The bad news is it's going to take a very long time to piece you back together. And in this moment, you might lose your right leg, you most definitely will lose your left leg, and you might lose your left hand. This was a day that I was celebrating my birthday. I was excited. I was on the sidelines. I was eating my chocolate-covered pretzels, minding my own business. But isn't that what happens when we're on the sidelines, when we feel like we're doing everything we're supposed to be doing, when we don't realize how much we're really taking life for granted? That is what I realized when I woke up from that coma, when my mom came in, and I had no idea how she had gotten there from Texas, where we were living at the time. My mom tells this story where when she first got to Boston and she went into my ICU room, she begged and pleaded with the doctors to take her to the right room because there is no way that the person laying in that bed was me. My own mother, who brought me into this world, did not recognize me. That is how much my life changed in that instant. And so I spent 56 days originally, and then it was a year and a half on bed rest. I was on 37 different medications just to make it throughout the day. You see this picture, I had an external fixator on. I hope no one in here has had to experience the pain of what that is. But during that time, they were trying, they were able to save my right leg. They were trying very hard to save my left leg. And I was being slowly pieced back together. But I learned a very valuable lesson. And I think the most stillness I've ever had in my entire life. I was go all the time, like I said, constantly chaotic. And I realized that expectations hinder our gratitude for right now, this present moment. In life, we always expect so many things, just like I did. I expected to get out of bed and I expected to put those 2 feet on the ground every single day. And I got so caught up in my routine that somewhere along the lines, I was just surviving. I was no longer living my life. And if I'm being quite honest with you, maybe I had never lived before because I had a series of trauma growing up. I grew up in a very abusive household. You name it, I've been through it in my childhood. It was awful. But I do believe that everything that I had going against me then led me to prepare for the biggest part of all. And first of all, I had to make a very big decision right off the bat. I had to say, I am going to count my blessings through this and not my problems because I had everything stacked up against me. The doctors had no idea how many surgeries that I would have to have. They had no idea how much would entail to piece me back together. But I had to trust that it was going to happen. And day by day, step by step, that's what we would do. And I think for us, and it's been a journey, and I can certainly get into more of the physical, but what it comes down to is that there are things in our lives that hold us back, that we know for a fact are not good for us, that we know that we are constantly holding on to because of the comfort of it. As a matter of fact, our brains are wired to, whenever something feels uncomfortable, send these red flashing lights and these big signals like, oh no, don't do this. But the interesting part about our brains is that they're built on survival alone. And sometimes it takes stepping out of that comfort zone, saying that I have to let go of this so that I can move on in a better direction. For me, for me, it was cutting out what I believe was holding me back. And it was my left leg. And I remember right before I went in for that surgery, I talked to my doctor and we were crying because it had been a year and a half. And he said, Rebekah, I'm so sorry for what you've been through. And I said, you know what? I wouldn't trade this right now. Thank you so much. Excuse me. I wouldn't trade right now for anything because this is the first time in my life where all I could do is rest. And I'm ready. I'm ready for what comes next. And I remember going into that surgery and thinking how I don't know how I'm ever going to live my life this way. How I had never met an amputee before Boston. I had never known this life at all, but that I was going to do it. Noah deserved a mom that was going to fight for him. I needed to show the people that saved me that I was worth saving. And I went into the OR and I had a mask that was being placed over my face, the anesthesia mask. And before I started counting down, my nurse, who had been with me through so many surgeries, she took my hand and she said, "Rebekah, are you scared? Are you okay? Are you scared?" And like I typically do, I made a terrible joke. And I said, "At least I can start every day on the right foot now because it's the only one left." And she kind of laughed and shook her head, much like she does. And she said, "Good. I am glad that you are scared because on the other side of that fear, you, my friend, will be unstoppable."
Feeling.
And Sandy, she's amazing.
What?
As that mask was placed over my face and I started counting down 10, 9, 8, I kept saying to myself, on the other side of this fear, I will be unstoppable. I didn't know what that meant. As a matter of fact, I might still not know what that means. But that's what I'm talking about. Those people that come into your life and lift you up, they're the angels all around us. I know when my mom, she first came to visit me, I was trying to do sign language to her because I still had tubes down my throat. And I quickly realized that my mom doesn't know sign language. And so she gave me a piece of paper and I wrote two things. One, God is not finished with me yet. And two, angels were all around us. I fully believe that in every person's life, we have more people looking out for us than we even realize. And I do believe that the devil is up against me today because I am now choking and my computer has died. There's that. That's okay though, because I can do this. But after my amputation, I woke up from that surgery and I was so excited. I was so ready. I was ready to take on the world. I decided that if I was going to live my life and not survive it, I was going to do everything that I could on a fake leg that I didn't do on two real ones. And I remember I had a conversation with my mom, and she was talking about me getting a beautiful cosmetic leg. Because if you've seen them, if you have amputees in your life, there's some people that have these legs that are like the mecca of legs, right? They're beautiful. I'm obsessed. And you can see the veins and in the toes, and it's just a. But I said, in order for me to fully accept this for what it is, I have to get a leg that looks like a fake leg. And my son was 7. And before the amputation, he said, "Mom, you gonna get your leg chopped off now?" And I said, "Yeah, buddy, I think that it's probably time. I should have done it." And he goes, "That's so cool. I'm gonna have a robot." And I'm like, "Yes, I am gonna be the coolest robot mom ever." Because in order for him to heal, in order for him to feel okay about this, I knew through his eyes that he was accepting things. And we have so many cards that we never want. And I used to be one of those people that says, everything happens for a reason. It's okay. But there are some things in our lives that are just not fair. And we will never understand the purpose for them. But what I now say is that while I do not believe everything happens for a reason, I believe that God can make anything good. And there has been, you guys are so sweet, thank you. There have been so many instances in my life where, yes, tragedy has struck, but my blessings far outweigh them every single day. And there were two things that in that year where I had my amputation, I got my prosthetic leg. I named her Felicia because I saw a quote, "I wish I had Felicia's life. She's always going somewhere." And at that point, I had been in a bed for a year and a half and I wanted to go and never stop again. And so I wrapped Felicia up in a baby blanket and she was like a new addition to my family. So I thought it was necessary to welcome her into the world, made a birth announcement for her. And Felicia and I were on our way. But I remember the first time that I stood up with my girl, my bestie here, And I wondered, how in the world was I ever going to walk around on a prosthetic leg for the rest of my life? It's extremely difficult. And not only that, but I had made a promise and I put it on Facebook. And when you do that, everything's official and there's no going back. So I said I was going to partake in the Boston Marathon. I was going to run on a prosthetic leg in the Boston Marathon. And I immediately regretted that decision. But nevertheless, I started training for it, and I would work out 5 to 6 days a week, and then I would go to the mall and I would mimic people's steps as they walked, because what happens is you automatically want to favor your remaining leg. And so I was walking and I was trying to get to the point where no one would know if I had a prosthetic leg, if I had pants on. And I got really good at it. I was really excited. And so I remember one day I walked into the grocery store and there was this wonderful gentleman who saw me. I do have the placard, by the way, but I never use it unless I'm very sore, very exhausted. That day, popped it up there, just needed some bread really quick. I ran in, and this lovely gentleman taps me on the shoulder, 5 shades of red. What gives you the right to park in a handicapped spot? Now, there's 2 ways to go about this. For me, I smiled. I lifted up my pant leg. As a matter of fact, I haven't introduced you guys. I lifted up my pant leg.
You pick her up.
Yeah. This is Carmen. Felicia is retired, but Carmen has taken her place. She's wonderful. But I said, sir, for the last couple of months, I have been trying to not only learn how to walk, but to run. And my main goal was, if I ever was able to have pants on and walk into somewhere, I wouldn't want someone to know that I was an amputee. I wanted to be able to have that ability. And you just told me oh. And I gave him the biggest hug, and he turned 5 more shades of red. And I guarantee that guy will never ask anyone about their handicap parking again. But I tell that story because there are 2 sides to that. What happened in that gentleman's life to where he was so angry at someone he didn't know for me to park in that spot? Did he have family members? You don't know what someone else is going through. And for me, I could have easily allowed him to steal my joy that day, because it's an easy thing to do, especially if I'm hurting, if I'm exhausted, if I'm working my hardest to do these things on a prosthetic leg. And I call them the joy suckers, right? You know who I'm talking about. All those people that are just like sucking the joy out of every day. Or you get in traffic, my husband, his joy suckers come then when he's arguing with the people that can't hear him. But anyway. But I recently read something that was very interesting to me, because our energy we can radiate our energy up to 10 feet. So we can change someone's mood and change someone's day just by being kind, just by being nice. And so for me, I could have easily went about that differently, but he had proven to me that I had accomplished my goal, that I can do this. And it was one of the most revolutionary moments of that journey for me. And I feel like if we look at things a little bit differently, if we go out into the world, and even the people who we feel are not the nicest people, what has happened in their lives to make them like that? Because we all have life blow up in our face. We all have challenges, and not everyone can go about it in the same way in terms of coping and putting on a brave face. Sometimes people are just trying to make it through the day. That is what I've really learned through my recovery. But that particular year or so, I told you that I was training for the Boston Marathon, and I got up to 16 miles a couple weeks before. I was ready. I was excited. And unfortunately, my leg busted open at the bottom because I was doing too much too soon. I had just been a recent amputee just for a few months, and I was already trying to run on it. And my doctor sat me down and he said, Rebekah, you're never going to be able to run this full thing. I think we need to bow out now. And so we made the decision that I was going to pop in and run the last 3.2 miles of the marathon. And 3.2 signified for me the amount of time that I was not only learning how to walk, but to run. And that day, I ran past on a prosthetic leg the spot where my life completely changed in. And I saw the ribbons because they didn't have the monuments yet on the post of the people that passed away that didn't get to be here. And I fell down at the finish line and I just was a puddle of tears. And I said, this is the day I take my life back. Little did I know that it was just in preparation for the moment that I really did take my life back. And that came a couple months later in a courtroom when I stood before the remaining bomber. And at first, I had to sit and give my testimony. I had to rehash all the terrible things that he had done to my son and I. I had to point out in the crowd where we were, circle our heads. I had to listen to the victims' families and the other survivors. And I had to watch a guy with absolutely no remorse lean back in his chair, crack jokes with his attorney, not acknowledge the jury by standing up on the first day of the trial. And it was one of the most difficult points of this journey for me. But something amazing happened, and I got to go back to Boston, and I got to give what's called a victim impact statement. And I had to Google what a victim impact statement meant because I've never been part of a federal trial before, and I hope I never am again. But it's the statement that's made right before the judge and the jury make the final verdict. And for me, I had already told him what had happened to me. I was supposed to go into more detail about it. But I said, I have one chance to stand before the biggest enemy of my life, and I'm not going to waste it. And that court day, when I got up, they made me go last. I turned in my statement. They made me go last out of 22 people. And I was in my Boston Strong colors, blue and yellow. Those were the colors of the marathon in 2013. And so they've become the Boston Strong colors now. And he would never look at me through the test, through the, when I testified, but he locked eyes with me then. And when I tell you, you can see people's compassion, you can see their soul, you can see their hearts through their eyes. His eyes were black. It was like staring at the face of the devil. And for someone who does not like confrontation, is always trying to make everyone happy, this little girl who was very abused and very alone, I stood up for the first time and I locked eyes with him and my voice never wavered. I didn't look at my notes. I said, I was asked to give a victim impact statement today, but in order to do that, I would have to be someone's victim, and I'm not yours, and I'm not your brother's. And I went on to say that one act of hate that stretched a couple hundred feet, we've seen an act of love that stretches hundreds of thousands of miles. And no one is going to remember their names. What they will remember and cling on to is what every survivor and victim's family has done in spite of trauma and tragedy. And I ended with a promise that I would use the rest of my life to make my small difference in the world, to change it for the better. Because if I've learned anything, it is that we all have that responsibility in one way or another. We all are able to share our light if we believe in that. And I used to say that if I could touch one person in a crowded room, then that's exactly what I want to do, because I will never know how me sharing my light with one individual can magnify. But I want to know at the end of every single day, that's what I have tried to do. And I have a note on my mirror that I look at every morning, and it says, I will not let evil win today. And when I look at that, I think about my abusive father, who I never got to say these things to. I think about the terrorists that tried to destroy my life and my son's life and so many others. I think about every single person that has wronged me, every obstacle that I have had to overcome. But I am so blessed beyond measure to have gone through it all, because it has led me to some of the most beautiful chapters in my life. And you can see the picture there of me standing in my blue and yellow, but I believe that our most broken chapters can lead us to the most beautiful places. Because in that same year, I reconnected with my college boyfriend. We got married on a beautiful beach in Jamaica. We had my daughter, Riley, and she almost lost her life when she came too early, and I almost lost my life delivering her. But that same little girl is now 8 years old with her own testimony and so sassy and fiery. And we've created, out of the biggest tragedy in our lives, a foundation that provides funding for trauma therapy for children and families. In 2018, we were established, and we've now provided care for over 600 families. Thank you. I talked a little bit about the scene that day, the emotional that I saw, the aftermath. But what I didn't tell you is how hard that was on my son. Want to go back to school. He didn't want to interact with the world. He didn't want to get back on his bike. Normal small things that kindergartner little boys shouldn't ever have to worry about. His innocence was taken from him that day, but we were allotted a lot of beautiful resources, a lot of trauma therapy in the aftermath. And what I saw were all of these families that were suffering through their own traumatic circumstances and not being afforded the same type of care that Noah and I were. And I had no idea what a 501c3 was. I had no idea what it takes to run a nonprofit. I began sitting on different boards and I began educating myself. I went back to school for psychology. I sat in a room, and the quote, you never want to be the smartest person in a room. You want to surround yourself with all these people that you can learn from. And every day I feel like I try to do that. I try to learn more and more. And I would have never realized what my one little voice could advocate and do. We never realize the potential that we have, that we can harness. We don't know the courage and bravery that lives deep down inside each of us until our backs are against the wall and life has blown up in our face. And we either choose to walk with God and say, all right, this is your way or the highway, and I've done it on my own for far too long, and I'm not doing it anymore. God has transformed my life. I have a beautiful family. And last year was the 10-year anniversary of the marathon, and I'll end with this. I wanted to run in it. That was my goal. I wanted to be able to do the full 26.2 miles last year. And I mentioned that I had a surgery that put me out for 7 months. And so I was really wrestling with just how hard that was for me to come to terms that I would not be able to run the marathon. And my husband came to me, who was in the 3 category too, never a runner, chocolate covered pretzels all the way. And he said, Rebekah, if you can't do it, I will. And my husband not only trained to run the marathon, but he ran on our charity team that we now have every year. And I stood with my 2 children in the same spot that I was in 2013, and we held up our signs, and my son was rubbing me on the back and asking me if I was okay as we cheered my husband across the Boston Marathon finish line. God can do amazing things in our lives if we allow him to do that. And I hope that you can see today that I am a living, breathing testament that one chapter does not have to be your whole story. And I am so thankful for you all allowing me to share a little bit of my story and journey with you. And I can't wait to meet each one of you at the finish line. God bless.